Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux, and today we're taking a look at getting some professional looking studio style product photography done right here at home with some pretty simple techniques and inexpensive bits and bobs, so you guys can follow along at home, but we've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to jump right in. So the first thing that we need to consider is our backdrop. To get nice, clean, white background images, we're going to need a white backdrop. So you'll see this a lot in professional photo studios. They'll have maybe a flexed piece of perspex up against the wall, and for smaller products, obviously a smaller piece of perspex. I'm going to be shooting pretty small products today, the type of thing that you would be finding on, say, a jewellery website or Etsy for crafts and things like that. This technique is going to be perfect for getting a white background shot of your small products that you might be selling out of your own home, and this is absolutely something you can do at home. I'm only going to use a sheet of white paper for my backdrop, simply because it's available easily anywhere and it's perfect for this type of thing. So I'm going to set this up on my dining table, nowhere special, and we can take a look at exactly what that's going to look like. So on my dining table, I'm going to put my little sheet of paper. I'm going to set it up with a nice little curve like this, and I'm going to be propping it up against well, a stack of books, and that way I can adjust the height of that curve just by adding or removing those books. Placing this all together, I've got my books in the background there. We're going to place our sheet of paper just onto the top of the books and then just hold them in place with something heavy so that the paper doesn't slide away. And you'll see there we now have control over how steep that curve is, but honestly the paper just falls quite nicely to be able to put our products down in the middle here and have a nice even backdrop. Whether you're shooting homemade crafts for Etsy, jewellery for an e-commerce site, or anything else that requires some product shots, chances are you're going to be getting a lot of variety within those products, and you're going to need to be taking hundreds of photos all really quickly, so you're not going to be wanting to change your setup around too much to cater for the different types of product. So as an analogue of all these different types of products, I've got some different colours of shotgun shells. I don't have hundreds of, I don't have a big stock of products lying around to demonstrate to you, but I am going to demonstrate using these. There's all different colours. They've got these shiny bases on them, which is going to be a challenge for us to light, so we can cater for that as well. And it's just going to be a case of finding the right setup to get through these as quickly as possible with the variety of different products that we've got. So where do we place these on our background? So to reduce your editing time, you're going to want to get the product in the same place on your background every single time so that you don't have to line up the pictures later on. It adds to the consistency when you're taking lots of shots for, say, an e-commerce website. So all I've done here is make a tiny little mark just on the paper down here and just at the other end here where I'm going to place my shell. So I'm just going to cover that mark ever so slightly with the back end of the shell, and the other mark is just sticking out the back where you're not going to be able to see it. And that means that I can then take a shot and then very quickly change out the product for the next one and get it in a very, very similar position. With our backdrop setup, I think it's a good size for the size of products that we're shooting, so that works really well. The next thing to think about is the placement of our camera and composing the image and making sure that we've got everything in frame. So you're going to want a lens or camera that is suitable for moving back a little bit and getting all of your subject in frame. Here I'm using a Tokina 100mm f2.8 lens, which gets me nice and close even though I'm a little bit further away than if I was shooting with something like an iPhone, for instance. And that's got everything that I need in frame. The next thing that you're going to need to consider when you're composing your shots is the aspect ratio of the images that you want at the end. So a lot of e-commerce platforms, so like Amazon, eBay, even your own custom websites, they're probably going to be tailored towards having a square format image, so a 1-to-1 ratio. That's something that you can do quite easily on, say, an iPhone. You can set your camera to take a square image, that's not a problem. If you're shooting on something like a DSLR, a lot of cameras aren't going to give you that option to cut down your image straight in the camera. Something that you can do is bring up grid lines on your screen. You can even go to the extent of putting tape over your viewfinder so that you have only that square that you can see. Obviously it's going to capture the rest of the image anyway, and then you can crop it down later if you need to. Worst case scenario, you need to picture in your mind's eye that the edges of this are going to be cut off if you're going square format. The worst thing that can happen is if you shoot hundreds of images of all of your different products and then realize that you need them in a square format, but you can't crop it down because you would be cropping out some of the product as well as the background. So just bear that in mind when you're composing your shot. The next thing that we need to talk about is lighting. We're going to be using the Adaptalux Studio on a tripod. Now I've got my nice special edition blue pod here, which is not for sale anymore, but it's a pretty cool little thing I thought I'd show you. So when you're setting up your lighting, you're going to need multiple light sources to get that perfectly white background. So I'm going to use, I've got a handful of different white lighting arms here, so I'm just going to start plugging these in. The first thing that we're going to need to think about is getting this background as overexposed as possible. So I'm going to bring in a single white lighting arm there, and I'm actually going to bring in a second as well. Bring that onto this side just so that it's even across the background, and if anything it's a little bit brighter in the middle here. So there we go with those. Make sure that your beam angle control is all the way out. And then we need to think about lighting our foreground as well and our products. So for that I'm going to bring in another white lighting arm over this side. That's going to light the left hand side of our product. So I'm actually going to pop a diffuser on there as well. And then for the other side of our product I'm going to bring in another diffused white light here. Now that we've got four lights in here, you can see that our shot is looking a lot nicer. And at this point it's just a case of balancing out these different lights to get the perfect amount of light falling on both your backdrop and on your product itself. The main principle is to get this background, the backdrop itself, much lighter than the product. So you need to be exposing for the product itself, and then that background will be blown out in pure white. And then that, if you can achieve that pure white, then that means you won't have to remove any backgrounds in Photoshop. And it's all to do with the balance of the light. So right now I'm connected to the control pod via Bluetooth, and you can see here that we've got all 5 lights at 50%. I'm just going to take a look at the front of my pod and mark just by using the color marking here. So these lights aren't actually yellow, but those are my 2 background lights. The 2 lighting arms that are pointed towards the background. And what I'm going to do is just bring those up to 100% just by selecting them and then moving the slider. And you can see that that has made a big difference to the background of our image. It's now much brighter than without it. The other 2 lights, they are our front lights, and this will allow you to balance those 2 different directions of light really easily from either side of the shot. So you can see there on the reflection of the bottom of this cartridge, you can easily decide how bright you'd like that reflection to be, just so that you can preserve the details on there. The same for the other side. You can decide how bright you want that light coming in from the other side. Now I actually want that quite bright because it's doing some nice things to the colours. This one can stay quite a lot lower down. And it's just a case of using your lights however they work, whether it's moving the lights closer or further into the image, or if there's a dimmer on them, or if you've got the Adaptalux Studio, then you can be using the adjustable brightnesses on each of the arms to get that perfect balance between the lighting on the front of your subject and the lighting on the backdrop. Once you've got some lighting in place, you can start taking a serious look at some settings on your camera. So you will need a manual camera, something that can set your shutter speed, aperture and ISO independently from one another without the camera deciding to change things on its own. Now even an iPhone can do this these days. You just need to go into say a Pro mode. Certainly on an Android it's called a Pro mode, and you can then change all of your settings manually and leave them there. And that's the important part, is leaving the settings as they are when you set them. You don't want the camera to be changing its exposure values based on the product itself, because if I were to change out, say, this red cartridge for a white one, the camera is going to then look at that image and think, this is too bright. It's going to bring all of your exposure down and you'll end up with a greyish murky background. And when you put a white background image next to a grey background image, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. So when you set your settings, leave them there. But what settings do we actually need? Now, the settings are going to change depending on your camera, your lens, your lighting, your product itself. There's a lot of different factors to take into account, so I can't just come out and say, well, you're going to need X, Y, and Z settings. What I can do, though, is talk to you a little bit about the balance that you're going to need to set between all three. The idea here is to expose for your foreground and not your background. Your background is going to be overexposed. That's the objective. That's how we're going to get that white background. So if you've got a different lighting setup to mine, you just need to make sure that you've got more light on the background than you do on the foreground, and you'll get a nice overexposed white background image. The settings that we need to worry about, though, are the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. So if you're shooting on an iPhone or something like that, then you need to not worry about the apertures. You're usually going to have a fixed aperture on a phone, so you're not going to be able to change that anyway. If you are shooting on a DSLR, you do have the opportunity to go and change your aperture values. And what that is going to allow you to do is change how much of your image is in focus at once, and that is called depth of field. So the depth of field is going to change depending on your aperture. The larger the aperture number, so the f number, the more of the image is going to be in focus, but the less light you're letting into your camera. I'll do a full explainer on exactly what settings mean in another video, but for now, if you just go middle of the road on your aperture, so I'm shooting at about f10, which has got me a decent depth of field on my small products like this. If you're finding that you've got too much depth of field, like there's too much of your product in focus and you wanted that focus to drop off towards the back, then go for a smaller number, and if you're finding that not enough of your image is in focus, then go for a higher number and compensate using your shutter speed. Because I'm shooting on a tripod, I can take my shutter speed down to quite a slow speed without having to worry about camera shake or much movement, and that's the joy of shooting in a studio. So now all that's left for me to do is to start changing out some of these products using our little mark that we've set up. I can be taking shots, I can be changing in and out all of these different products so that I can get some nice little product shots one by one really quickly without having to change too much about my lighting. Now if I find that I've got a couple of products that are requiring a little bit extra light or a little bit less light, I can go back to my app and just select the lighting arm that I want to change and just adjust it ever so slightly suit the particular product. I've got through my products really quickly today because I've been using those same principles and I've been focusing on consistency. Once you've got one setup decided for one product, you can roll that setup out across all of the rest of your products without changing too much at all. In fact, you don't want to be changing very much, because if you're scrolling down a website looking at all of the different products, that's what you're looking at, is the products, and you don't want the photography getting in the way. If the backgrounds are all different shades of grey and white, and some of the products are too dark, some of them are too bright, some of them are off to the left of the frame, if you've got inconsistencies in there, that's what people will notice instead of the products themselves. So that's why we go for white background shots like this, is to remove any distractions from the product itself. So there you go, guys. That's a really quick walkthrough of how to do some white background studio-based photography. And don't forget that all of this is scalable for different types of products, different sizes. You just need to stick to those same principles of making the background lighter than the foreground and sticking to your settings, not changing too much. Let us know down in the comments what you think to today's shoot. Let us know how you're using these principles to shoot your own products and what those products are and where you're putting them, so we can all go and have a look at your results. If you like the video, go and give it a like whilst you're down there. Make sure to subscribe, because we've got a lot more handy tips, ideas and inspiration in the pipeline coming very soon. But for now, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.